Okay, so let's wrap this lecture up to kind of talk about things from an applications perspective, and let's start with where we're headed in terms of LED technology. And so this is a plot of luminous efficiency, lumens per watt, versus year for various lighting technologies. I'll talk on the next slide about what lumens per watt means, but it's a measure of how optically efficient something can be for lighting applications. So you can see here's incandescent bulbs down here, halogen bulbs, which are more efficient, compact fluorescent, and then some of the high-intensity discharge and linear fluorescence. Then you can see the onset of LEDs and where they're projecting they're going, including even white organic light-emitting diode panels, which we'll talk about next lecture. So you can clearly see that LED technology is just going to dominate. In fact, I'm going to show you data points in a little while here, which already show LEDs which are efficient up to 200 lumens per watt. So what's a lumen per watt? Well, a lumen per watt basically takes into consideration brightness perceived by the human eye. So this is a plot of eye sensitivity function on this axis, and on this axis, lumens per watt, meaning how much brightness do you see per watt of light versus wavelength. So an easy way to understand this is you know that the eye cannot see infrared light, right? So way out here in the infrared, there are no lumens per watt. It goes to zero because your eye can't see that light. Go out into the ultraviolet, same thing. Out in the UV, the light, your eyes can't see that, so there's no lumens per watt. Going to wavelengths in the visible spectrum, you can see the luminous efficiency of the human eye to detect light increases, peaks out in the green, and then falls off in the red as you go towards the infrared again. So, a way this affects us with LEDs is, let's say you have blue LEDs that are just electrically as efficient as green LEDs. The blue LEDs will look dimmer, less bright, because they have a lower luminous efficiency. Look, this is a log scale here, okay? Well, this is log, but this is lumen per watt. This is log scale here too. Blue would be here, and green would be way up here. So it's about an order of magnitude greater in terms of efficiency, or as the eye sees it, or brightness. And it's also no mistake that the peak intensity for lumens per watt is in the green. Why would that make sense? Two reasons. One, if you look at the peak intensity of the sun, it peaks out in the green. So we adapted over time to the environment around us. And related to that, if you think about people growing up in Mesopotamia and evolving over time, what is one of the dominant colors you see yourself around if it's an area where humans could thrive with lots of vegetation? Chlorophyll, lots of green as well. So this just shows you how the human eye has evolved to the environments around us over time. So we now understand lumens per watt. So how do we make white LEDs then? Because for lighting, obviously I'm not, if I look at a LED car lamp or a flashlight or lighting appearing, in terms of room lighting, they're not red LEDs or blue LEDs. We want white light. So one option would be that you basically get a bunch of different LEDs of different colors, you get them to emit light, and if you mix all the colors, you get white light, as you can see here in the center. But that is totally impractical from a cost perspective. And so how you make a white LED these days is inside the LED, you've got your wires. Here's the LED package, okay? Here's one wire, it bonds to the semiconductor. Here's the other wire that bonds to the bottom of the semiconductor here, okay? And looking inside here, I've got the actual gallium nitride LED, which emits blue light, and then I buried that on top of that with a phosphor, a yellow phosphor. So what happens is the blue light partially escapes, so I get some blue light out, but a portion of the blue light is absorbed by the phosphor, which then fluoresces and re-emits yellow light. So I get a combination of blue and yellow coming out. You can see that shown here in this plot of optical power versus wavelength for this type of white LED. This is a phosphor-based white LED. Here's my indium gallium nitride emission wavelength here in the blue. So if it was just indium gallium nitride, they showed a dotted line to show what that would look like. But they put a phosphor on this. which is absorbing some of this higher energy light, shifting it to lower energy, longer wavelength yellow light, and then I get this broad yellow emission out here. To the human eye, this is enough yellow, green, and red combined with blue that it looks white, just like this LED lamp here. The phosphor is a yttrium, aluminum, garnet, cerium, and it's the most common phosphor that's used in these type of white LEDs. So here's one of the challenges. Let's say your local art museum switches to these type of LEDs, and all the patrons say that the art looks terrible. All the colors are off a little bit. Well, why is that, and how would you fix it? Well, imagine I have a bunch of paintings. Let's say I have a painting of a seashore, and that seashore has a significant amount of color right here in the cyan. Well, you could see the LEDs would not be illuminating that painting with as much light in the cyan, so the pigments that reflect cyan light in that painting would look darker, and the cyan color would be way off, whereas the blue and the yellow colors would look much brighter. So the color would be shifted and off. So how do you fix that? Well, what they do is they basically add more phosphors. And so if you look at a high quality white LED, they'll add in more phosphors, which basically take the emission and it'll average it out over many peaks, and it looks more average, like a white light emission spectrum in the end. Those cost more money though. And so you have to be careful when you buy LEDs, what's the application and how will the emission spectrum affect you compared to a natural sunlight or incandescent, which has a nice smooth emission index. In terms of where we're headed as well, it's interesting to look at the cost of LEDs over time. So this is the luminaire cost versus time, and this means basically the whole lighting fixture, like the bulb you screw in and all the mechanical packaging that goes with it. And so you could see the LEDs themselves used to be a big part of the cost, but over time the LEDs are becoming a tiny part of the cost, and you could see that the mechanical thermal part of this becomes the single biggest cost. And the reason why is that, you know, you can imagine, look up in any room or something like that, you've got these huge fluorescent lights, right? So if I take a typical fluorescent light bulb, large fluorescent light bulb, right? Or I could take a typical light bulb that we have, it's got a large area. So if it gets hot, I can get the heat dissipation to come off that thing just by air cooling around it, right? Well, for an LED, you can get the same amount of light out of something which has an absolutely tiny package. But the problem is that you have a lot of heat loss still, and so you got to get that heat out. So what you typically do is you take that tiny LED and then you attach it to a huge heat sink. And so here's your LED emitting out a lot of photons, and then on the back of this thing you've got this huge chunk of metal which helps pull the heat out of it and keep it cool enough that it can operate. And so you can see that, and that's going to be one of the significant issues in terms of LED cost. As they reduce the cost over time, you still have to pay for the big hunk of metal that cools the LED. So where we're headed, here's a great company in the US to work for if you're interested in working in semiconductors, such as LEDs. They also do wide bandgap semiconductors as well. We saw some amplifier circuits in some of our previous lectures, but Cree is really known for its LED technology. And so here's a recent press release where they broke the world record again. They said Cree has a 231 lumen per watt LED, which shatters the LED efficiency records. And so they're a company here in the US that has figured out substrates, growth techniques, phosphors, packaging, everything that makes these things the most efficient LEDs in the world. Now, remember, we can also tune the emission from a semiconductor using quantum wells, and I'll show you on the next slide why this is important. And so let's say I have a wide bandgap aluminum gallium arsenide here, wide bandgap aluminum gallium arsenide here, and narrower bandgap gallium arsenide here. If I basically plot my conduction band, it would be like this, valence band like this, because this is narrower bandgap. But if I make this narrow enough here, I start to get a quantum well, which means my electrons have to sit at discrete energy states. And I can tune, as I change the width of my quantum well, L here, I can change the energy level spacings and shift them up or down. And so I'll talk about more what this does for us on the next slide beyond being able to tune the light more. But the implications on the applied voltage are as follows. You know that you're always going to have to pay the price for the photon you emit. And so I always have to pay the price for the emission wavelength, which is I have the energy of the photon divided by Q. That gives me units of voltage. And that's basically what levels are you transitioning for to get your light emission. With any kind of diode, I always have some series resistance times the current, so I get a little bit of voltage drop across the semiconductors, because I always have some series resistance as I'm trying to get current into the light emitting region. And the other thing I've done here is that by putting these wider band gap regions here, I've created an extra delta EC for the conduction band and an extra delta EV for the valence band, where I had to bring in carriers with energy more than what I needed, right? So I bring in holes with more energy than I needed to get it here, electrons with more energy than I needed to get it here. So to get these electrons into the device, I have to pay this price in voltage as well. And so those show up as well. Those deltas divided by Q gives me voltage, and that's the voltage you would have when you try to operate a quantum well type device. Now, why do we want quantum well type devices? Well, quantum wells, in some cases, and they're used in most LEDs these days, allow higher efficiency because they promote a higher radiative efficiency. That internal quantum efficiency, they increase it. They also are able to trap carriers so you have less of that surface recombination, just like we did with the double heterojunction LED. I'm not going to go into more detail than that in terms of how they do that because that's beyond the scope of this course. Here's some nice diagrams of quantum well LEDs from Fred Schubert's page at RPI. Here's an undoped structure, wide band gap, and then you use narrow band gaps to make quantum wells. This is undoped, so I don't have a p-n junction. If I dope it, things shift, right? Because the Fermi levels have to shift and line up. So now I've doped it. This is p-type, Fermi level close to the valence. This is n-type, small gap there. Here's my intrinsic here in the center, which will be dominated by the P and the N-type regions. I get a depletion region, and here's my little quantum wells, which give me emission. And something even better, what they'll do is you look at modern LEDs, they'll start building in things like electron and hole barriers, an electron barrier shown here, where my holes come in here, and then they can go inside the quantum wells, and then my electrons can come in here and get trapped inside the quantum wells, as I put forward bias on this to start diffusing them over. And what the electron blocking layer does is it makes sure that the electrons cannot make it past this barrier here. So they won't go over here, because I want the recombination to occur here in the quantum well area, right? I don't want the recombination to occur out here because it's not as efficient. And so they put this electron barrier here, which is a wider band gap semiconductor with the right doping, such that its conduction and valence bands line up like this. And I could put another one over here, if I wanted to basically block the holes as well. And so you can see when you look at a modern LED, band gap engineering is a significant part of the design to get maximum efficiency. So, another application beyond solid state lighting is communication. I could take some LEDs over here, I could have a plastic optical fiber and some detectors here, and I could send data by turning the LEDs on and off and generating light pulses of data. So if I look at the light pulses, I just basically generate zeros and ones by sending light pulses down the optical fiber. And we'll talk more about optical fibers when we do lasers, but basically you've got a higher refractive index layer, lower refractive index layer on the outside. You get that same total internal reflection we talked about before, which guides light down the fiber with very low loss, because unlike a metal reflector, which is only 90% reflective, total internal reflection has no optical loss because there's no absorption by the reflection whatsoever, like you would have with the metal. So, if you want to use LEDs for communication, they're only typically used for short distance communications. Why is that? Well, a typical fiber for LED communication is made out of polymethyl methacrylate, acrylic, a common plastic. Here's the attenuation coefficient in dBs per kilometer, alpha, versus wavelength. Now notice they're putting it not in terms of units of inverse centimeters, but they're doing dB per kilometer. And so if we want to figure out how far our signal could go, we'll do a simple calculation where we'll say, okay, let's assume our output power over input power drops to 10% of its original signal, and let's assume that I'm going to use red light, 600 nanometer light right here with an absorption coefficient, or I could use 650 here with an attenuation coefficient that is of around 100. Well, if you put these back in here and you solve for z, you'll find that z equals 0.1 kilometers or only 100 meters, meaning that this is good for cars, stereos, and industrial controls where you move distances of 100 meters or less, but this is not good for transoceanic internet or internet going between cities or things like that, because the attenuation would be way too great. You just have too much absorption in the plastic itself. And so this is one of those applications you see on the back of a TV where it's got digital audio out or a stereo. You've got a coax line or you've got an optical signal which is digital and has no interference. People like these because it can get a very high speed communication, lots of data, but you also like it because unlike a coax line, the light goes through this, it's not interfered by all the other electromagnetic interference around you, so there's no noise that gets imposed on the optical line like you would with a metal cable. We'll talk about the longer distance communication and higher speed versions of fiber optics when we cover lasers. So that's it. You're done with LEDs. Here's some review questions in terms of why you make LEDs, what's lumens per watt, what LEDs are used for what type of optical communications, and what's a good U.S. company to work for in LED technology.